English Online Summit Top-12. First of all, I'd like to check the connection. Please type in yes if you can see and hear me well. Great. Right. As usual, at the beginning of the webinar, we pay attention to our dedicated partners. You see them on the screen right now. So this is Studycraft Company, Star Academy, Moscow International Academy, Language Просвещение, Nara, the Dmitry Nikitin School, Skyeng, Title Publishing House, Fabula, I Love English Project, and Child Friendly Phonics. So our golden partner Star Academy offers different opportunities for English language teachers and different summer camps abroad. And it offers as well a unique TESOL course, which leads to teaching English for speakers of other languages qualification and great career opportunities. And we have a special offer for the participants of today's webinar. So it's my honor to give the floor today to James Egerton, who will be speaking about quite interesting talk called Psych Up Your Teaching. So James, it's your turn, and you can join in.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, good. Then we'll get started. So hello again, my name is James Egerton, and before we start I'd like to say a very big thank you to Elena and Yevgeny and the team at Trendy English for inviting me to present today. Very excited about it. So we are going to be talking about psychology in teaching. Now, I'm not a psychologist myself. I am an English teacher, assistant director of studies currently in Riga in Latvia. So everything that I am going to talk about, I've read and I've researched myself as a fan of psychology, but my main profession is as an English teacher. So I've tried to adapt everything that I've learned into the classroom. So what is psychology? The scientific study of people, the mind, and behavior. Okay, so why am I going to be talking about this today? Why do I think it's important to have an awareness of psychology when we're teaching? Well, teaching is about people. A classroom is a group of people first. And in order to teach someone something, we need to understand how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how they're motivated. So psychology is a hugely important aspect in somebody's education. Obviously, the mind is where things get stored. We remember or forget language. So understanding the mind, psychology is about neuroscience as well. It's not just about things that we can't measure. It is a physical science as well. And behavior, of course, is huge, very, very important when we're talking about learning. Again, it comes back to motivation, it comes back to how you react to the people around you in the room. So all of these things are integral to to teaching and to learning. So I'd like to plug a book. I don't make any profits off this book, but it's an excellent book that gave many of the ideas that I'm going to talk to you about today. And this talk is going to look at 6 different areas of psychology that came from a course that I wrote and gave to my fellow English teachers at IH Riga in February and March of this year. So we won't have time to go into huge amounts of detail on any one of the 6 areas that we'll talk about, but I hope that they spark your interest, lead to further research, and lead to you implementing some of the ideas that we'll talk about during the webinar. So as I said in the description of the webinar, we're going to be focusing as much as possible on teaching teenagers. A lot of the things that we'll discuss will be applicable to younger learners and to adults. But when possible, I'll make specific reference to teenagers because, well, number one, they're quite difficult to teach in many cases because they're quite difficult to understand because they're going through a lot of changes themselves at this age. So psychologically, there's a lot of interesting developments going on, which is very, very particular for this age. So, as I said, when appropriate, I'll be referencing teenagers specifically, but a lot of these things are applicable across the age groups. Okay, so the first topic is the teenage brain. So, as I said, the teenage brain is a fascinating thing because it's changing so rapidly. So in order to be able to teach a teenager, we need to understand, well, as much as possible understand and at least empathize with what's going on inside their heads neurologically. Okay, we might not want to see, you know, what they're thinking all the time, but there are some general trends that help us to teach. By the way, if you have any questions, sorry, I didn't say this before. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat box. But if possible, save them for the end. I'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. If there's anything that you need clarifying, then write it in the chat box, and I'll try to keep looking down. But if not, then there will be some time at the end. Okay, so the teenage brain. So the first issue with the teenage brain is that the prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to develop. Okay. Now the prefrontal cortex is responsible for judgment and impulse control and decision making and things like this. So if your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, then you lack these skills. So it's actually activated only 20% of the time in 13 to 15-year-olds. 20% of the time they're actually using this part of the brain, which thinks logically in their decision making. So we can only imagine this leads to some interesting decisions, to say the least. So what can we do as teachers to react to this? Well, setting very clear classroom rules is useful because teenagers can't always regulate their own behavior, so we need to do it for them. So, you know, being consistent with the rules. We'll talk about rule setting later in a bit more detail, but it's very important that we set these boundaries. And then helping them organize themselves. So this is a table that a colleague showed me at an International House conference a few months ago, and this is how she organizes her teenagers' work. So everything that they do goes into one of 4 boxes. It's urgent and important, so they need to do it now. It's important, but it's not urgent. Okay, you can decide when to do it. It's urgent, but it's not important, so you can delegate it or leave it for later. And it's not important and it's not urgent, so just forget about it. So helping them to compartmentalize what they need to do and to give things more priority over other things will help them massively, and it's actually very useful for us adults and teachers as well that have a lot of things to do. We just need to decide which things are more important and only do the things that we can do first. But yeah, particularly problematic for teenagers whose decision-making frontal cortex is not yet fully grown. Okay, the second issue that the teenage brain gives us is anger management. Has anybody suffered from an angry teenager in class or at home? Yes. Yes, they're often furious sometimes. Again, it's very hard to empathize when this is happening, okay, because our reaction is to meet it with the same aggression. But it's very, very important that we meet it with calm as much as possible, because the teenagers' brains are wired for conflict to escalate. So if somebody meets their aggression with further aggression, then things will get worse and worse. I know it's easier said than done, but yeah, this is the advice in the literature. All right, so the third issue with the teenage brain, dopamine problems. So as you might know, dopamine is one of the 4 feel-good chemicals that are released in the brain. So dopamine is what we get when we set and meet goals, objectives that we set ourselves. Serotonin is the feel-good feeling we get when we feel important, we feel valued. Endorphins is a response to stress. Like if you've just been for a very hard run and then it finishes, you often get an endorphin release because your body's happy that it's over. And oxytocin is what we get through feelings of intimacy, of friendship, and things like that. So a problem in the teenage brain with dopamine. The dopamine receptors, the things that control the dopamine in the brain, are, well, to put it mildly, a bit messed up. So what does this mean? So we need to set up regular opportunities to get this dopamine fix, because they're like drug addicts for dopamine at this point in their lives. So this means competitions, a lot of positive reinforcement, complimenting students specifically for the work that they do, and yeah, giving students this sort of, as I say, a dopamine fix whenever possible, but for good reasons. Okay, don't just be showering students with praise. Sort of the next thing that we're going to be talking about with growth mindset. But it's very important to be specific, but to recognize that they need this dopamine, and it doesn't always release at the right times. Okay, and the last issue we're going to be discussing regarding the teenage brain is that their thinking will go from concrete thinking to abstract thinking during this age. So concrete thinking is specific, abstract thinking is relative. So what does that mean in practice? This is quite a nice little image to show that. So this means that we have to be wary of giving different levels of, should we say, explanation in class. Some students will still only be able to think concretely at 15 years old. So an apple is an apple is an apple. And other students will be able to think more abstractly. So we need to sort of give 2 layers of explanation to engage both levels of processing. So some of these things we can't do much about. This is what's happening in the brain at this time, between 13, and about 18. So there's not much we can do about it, but be aware and adapt our teaching to what is happening in there as much as possible. Okay. So the second topic that I've taken from my course on psychology in teaching English is growth mindset. Has anybody heard of growth mindset before? Yes, no, no. Okay. So growth mindset it's basically a set of beliefs about learning which then affect how much we can learn and affect our attitudes towards our achievement and our learning and our education. So a growth mindset, according to Mercer, is the foundation on which all other positive learning behaviors are built. So we're going to see why. If you have a growth mindset, you believe that you can learn, okay? So you believe that you can learn, and so you act in ways which make that more likely. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we're going to look at some details of that now. So it's from a psychologist called Carol Dweck, and it's been used in many areas of business and education throughout the world, and it is a very, very powerful thing. I use it myself. I try to keep as growth mindset as possible, especially with challenges that I face. So I'll explain a bit more. So growth mindset's all about your basic beliefs on intelligence. So let's just have a look at number one. I believe intelligence, A, is a characteristic that we're born with and we can't do much to change, or B, is something that can be changed no matter who you are. So if you just type in the chat box your reaction to question one, just A or B. A lot of B's, which is encouraging, because I'd be worried from teachers who believe that you can't change somebody's intelligence, because that's our job, to help people to unlock their intelligence. So we need to believe that it can be improved. Of course, there is a genetic element to intelligence, to IQ, but once we take off from this genetic element, there is a huge amount of scope for improvement. Okay, how about number two? Failing at something pushes me to keep trying until I get it, depresses me and puts me off wasting more time on it. Do you think it's more A or more B? Excuse me. It does depend on the person, yeah, and it depends on the situation, of course. It depends. Which one generally would help us if we are moving towards a valued goal? I mean, as long as we have the correct strategies, then giving up first time, which is B, is not going to help us in the long run. Obviously, we have to be careful with the strategies that we're employing, because if you fail at something and you just say, oh, I have a growth mindset, I can keep going at this and everything will be fine. And if you're doing it with the wrong strategy, if you're doing it with the wrong technique, then you're just going to waste more time doing the same thing. So, yeah, I'd say you have to, not be deterred. Nobody likes failing at anything. You don't have to celebrate it, but it's part of the process of learning something. As long as you have the correct technique or the correct strategy in order to do this. So these these two sets of beliefs are about growth mindset. Growth mindset 1B, growth mindset 2A is more towards growth mindset. And then a fixed mindset, which is the opposite, will be more inclined to think that intelligence is innate, is something you're born with. And if you fail at something, it shows that what you're born with is not enough, so you should give up and do something else. So we'll go through these very quickly. I'd like a student who hopefully believes they can get better at a language. A, as we mentioned before. We'd probably like a student who responds positively to feedback, right? If you say, okay, you don't say it, fluor, it's pronounced flower. Or, you know, it could be pronunciation, could be grammar, could be vocabulary, but it's very difficult to improve if you have a strong negative sensation towards feedback. And 3, I'm sure we'd all love a student to challenge themselves to improve. Okay, that's self-motivated. So just to tie up the attitudes that are associated with growth mindset and fixed mindset. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to have a read through. Okay. So generally speaking, a student with a growth mindset will improve much faster and with much greater, will develop faster and much greater than a student with a fixed mindset who's likely to give up and who won't listen to feedback, is scared to make mistakes, so they don't even put their hand up in class and answer because they're scared to make the mistake, because making a mistake will show everybody that you're not born with the right intelligence, which is another fixed mindset belief. So we need to, as much as possible, encourage growth mindset attitudes in our classrooms and in ourselves. In ourselves first, because we are the example for the students. So what can we do then to encourage students to have a growth mindset? It's not something that you can just throw at someone in one day. It's something that we need to be consistent with. So the first thing we can do is be careful with the ways that we give feedback to students. So when we praise students, the praise should be focused on the effort they put in and not on their innate talent. So, well done, you've tried really hard to, and then something specific, rather than, oh, you're a star. Because you're a star is what you are. It feels like what you're born with, whereas you've put a lot of effort into is something specific, which I know that I can carry forward into my future projects, into my future work. And the praise should look at the process. As I said before, it should be about specific aspects of the work or of the activity that you're happy with and that you'd like the student to continue. And Carol Dweck, who invented the growth mindset, talks about using yet with negative feedback. So there's a huge difference between you don't understand the present continuous and you don't understand the present continuous yet. Because yet gives the person a an idea that it's possible in the future. It gives them a path to succeed in the future. And I think you should always find something to comment on that you say to the student, you've done this, very good, very well, but you haven't done this yet, because there's always something to improve on. But using the word yet is a very powerful thing. It's only 3 letters, but it's a very powerful thing. And again, this must be repeated again and again. We can't just use this once and then forget about it for 6 months. So it's how we give feedback, especially to the younger students, that conditions them to think in a certain way about their own intelligence and about how they can improve it. So have a read of this text and decide which one is the more appropriate feedback using the growth mindset principles. One more person typing. Don't copy the others. Yes, it is B. So strong effort. So we're praising the effort of the student. A wide range of specific vocabulary. We are being specific about what they've done well. So if you look against feedback A, good paragraph. Okay, well, what's good about the paragraph? What do I need to do the same? What have I done well? What do I need to do the same next time? It doesn't say anything about the process. Wide range of specific vocabulary does. And sentence division isn't right yet. Yet, just 3 letters, but what it means is you can make it right in the future. Okay, so that was feedback. It's also very important that students are aware of growth mindset, of mindset theory, of how the brain works, because it's hugely motivating for them to know. For example, this picture is an image of neurons in the brain, and there's some excellent videos online from the Khan Academy, short videos, 5 or 6 minutes, but they show how as we learn more and more, the neurons will literally grow and make more connections between them, so that your brain is actually a muscle which is growing and developing as your knowledge increases. So showing students things like this is incredibly powerful, because they see that the more they study and the harder they work, the more their neurons, literally their brain, it won't grow out, but the neurons inside the brain are growing, making these connections, and they're increasing their knowledge in this way. And I've also produced a growth mindset lesson plan on my blog. I'll leave the links for it in the chat box at the end. But I don't know if anybody is a member of IATF, or it was in the IATF magazine Voices in the March and April edition. But it's all on my blog, pretty much the same article, with all the materials that you need, that you can download them in PDFs. So it's just a 1.5 hour lesson for teens. There's 2 different options for the lesson, and it's just making them aware of the issues of how we think about our own intelligence, and make them aware of growth mindset and fixed mindset as a concept. But it is not a magic wand. Like anything useful, it can be misused and it can be made into a synonym of good and bad. And of course, nothing is that simple. So you also need to educate your students that growth mindset is a very powerful thing when used properly. But, you know, when we, as I said before, when we are carrying out the incorrect strategy, then growth mindset is not useful. Because the problem is not my attitude towards my learning. The problem is the strategy, is the technique that I'm using. So it would be useless for a student with the wrong strategy, the wrong learning strategy, to be repeating to themselves, "Oh, growth mindset, never give up. I make a mistake and I try again." It would be useless in this situation if their strategy is wrong, if their technique is wrong, because they'll just be repeating the same error again and again. So you need to be very careful that it's not just simplified into growth mindset good, fixed mindset bad, because there are situations when a growth mindset won't help us as much. So have a look at these two situations. In which one of these is having a growth mindset helpful? Maria's in there first. In which one is having a growth mindset helpful? It's actually A. Growth mindset's helpful when it's about a belief about the learning. The problem with B is that Vlad has the wrong method, has the wrong technique. And because he's repeating to himself growth mindset, he's repeating the same method. Okay, so what Vlad would actually need to do is to have a look at the method, understand, of course, that he can change how he's doing it or what he's doing to practice it, and then try another method. Linda in A, it's about her beliefs about her own learning. Oh, I'm rubbish at writing. Okay, so this is like a fixed mindset attitude. I'm rubbish at writing. Whereas we'd like to help Linda to realize that you're not rubbish at writing through birth. You can develop the skill. Your intelligence is like this empty whiteboard behind me that can be written on. I'm not sure if the metaphor is clear, but it's a skill that she can work on. She doesn't think she can improve it. This is the biggest problem, because her negativity is going to affect the way that she approaches the work. So Linda needs in a growth mindset. Vlad, not so much in this case. What he needs to do is to change the strategy. I hope that makes sense. Again, this is the sort of thing, as I said at the beginning, where it does deserve a lot more reading and research. So I hope that you have a look at my blog. I've actually got a section on mindset. So I hope that you have a greater look into it and agree that it's a very powerful tool that we can use in education. So just to summarize this section, growth mindset is very important. So you need to believe that you can improve. You shouldn't be deterred by failing, but you should almost understand that failing at something is part of the process of getting better. As long as you fail and then you learn from your mistakes and then you change what you're doing and improve what you're doing. Growth mindset tells us that intelligence can be developed. Okay, so of course I'm going to spend some extra time studying because I believe that will help me to improve. But this is very important. We also need to employ effective strategies, learning strategies, and grit is another key element. So sometimes if you have the right strategy, what's stopping you, what's stopping people from getting to where they need to go or where they want to go, is the determination to put the time and effort in. So if we put these three things together effectively, then that can be extremely powerful. Great combination. Okay, so the third topic that we'll be discussing today, motivation. Obviously deserves hours and hours on its own, but we don't have that much time. So I'm just going to go over a few key elements of motivation. So I'd always start with the golden circle, it's called, by Simon Sinek. He's actually got a very, very good TED talk, if you have time to watch it, all about how this golden circle, I think he's talking about its relation to marketing a product, but our motivation to behave in a certain way. So we should always start with why. Why are we doing something? And your students should be encouraged to think about why. In our case, why are they learning English? And when we have that as our core motivation, then we can build outwards and we can start thinking, okay, well, I want to learn English in order to speak more fluently with my cousins in Ireland. Okay, that's a good motivation. So it's about your personal relationships through speaking. Then second is, how can we do this? So, you know, are we doing it through lessons? Are we doing it through grammar activities? Are we doing it through writing, or in some way? And then what? So what is the least important, and it's the last thing that we should look at. The what is the day-to-day, the small details. But it should all relate back to why. So the motivation, the central motivation is, why are you doing something? If you have a good why, there is a phrase, if you have a strong why, then you can put up with any how, something like that. So that's key to motivation. So encouraging students to think about why they're studying English. There are hundreds of excellent reasons to study English, and really focus on that why will help them when they're looking at the details of the day-to-day difficulties of studying a language. Okay, so motivation. So we can talk about intrinsic motivation, which is also known as push factors. So things that you decide for yourself to make you do something, you know, for your own reasons, and nothing to do with outside influences. And extrinsic motivations, pull factors, so things that other people are going to give you or you're going to get because of what you've achieved. So there are some examples there in the image: pride, interest, achievement, curiosity. These are intrinsic factors, push factors. And then grades, punishment, praise, money, extrinsic factors. Okay, so we usually need a mixture of intrinsic and extrinsic motivations in order to do something. How can we get these? How can we focus on these in the classroom? How can students focus on these? Goals. Better have a valued goal, or you can't get any positive motivation. How are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? Okay, and this all comes back to the idea of dopamine. Okay, do you remember dopamine was the chemical that's released when we set a goal and meet a goal? And we need to make sure that students get their regular fix of dopamine. Teenage students especially get their regular fix of dopamine. They can't get this if they don't set up any goals for themselves. They can't meet goals if they don't set goals. So goals can be set effectively using the SMART acronym. So a goal has to be specific, it has to be measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Okay. There's another lesson plan on my blog to do with smart goal setting for students, especially useful at the start of term or at the beginning of a year, academic year or calendar year. But gets students to think about what is the next step in their learning of English, and what are they going to do to get there. So these big objectives need to be broken down into shorter term goals and then micro habits. What are they going to do every single day to work towards that goal step by step? So using these 5 features is very, very useful. Okay, so goals, the goals that we set can be mastery goals, so experiences and applying knowledge, or they can be performance goals, grades, ranking, praise, extrinsic reward. So generally speaking, it's not as clear black and white as this, but generally speaking, a mastery goal is an intrinsic goal, something for yourself, and a performance goal is an extrinsic motivation, so something that you get from the outside. So let's have a look at a few examples. So is this a mastery goal or a performance goal? You type in the chat box. Thank you, Maria. Yes, it is a mastery goal. Okay, next one. Mastery goal or performance goal? Well done, Tatiana and Maria again. Yes, it's a performance goal. It's a goal whose effect is coming from outside. It doesn't depend on me. It depends on how my friend Vlad does in the exam. If Vlad does terribly and I beat him, it's not a great goal to have, because it's not too difficult in that case. Okay, 2 more. Mastery goal or performance goal? Yep, it's another performance goal. It's about what you get. And 5 stars. So we give out stickers and we give out stars. It can be hugely motivating as long as the students know why they got them. So if we remember 5 minutes in the past to the growth mindset section about giving specific praise, because then the students know what they need to continue doing. Well, this is the same case here. If you give out gold stars or stickers, that's fine, that's fantastic. But make sure the students know why they got them. And the last one. This is my goal. Is it mastery or performance? It is. It's an experience. It's something that I can do with the language myself. I don't need anybody else's input. Yeah, good. Well done. Thanks for participating, by the way. It's always a bit awkward when you ask questions and nobody answers in the chat box, so thank you very much for paying attention. So you can have mastery goals and you can have performance goals. The number one most important thing is to have a goal when you're learning something, goals when you're learning something. But the research suggests that mastery goals are much more effective in the long term than performance goals. So here's a quote to have a read through. So what does that mean? That means that we should encourage students to find their mastery goals, their intrinsic motivation for learning English, and then help them to achieve this. And when they have difficulties, because they have a strong reason, a strong why, then they're more likely to persevere. If all of their goals are about other people, what they get from other people, or beating other people, then the research suggests that they're going to give up a lot easier. So when possible, encourage mastery goals. Okay, so that's all for motivation. Yeah, I mean, motivation and goal setting sort of go hand in hand. It's very, very important to have goals in order to be motivated. Okay, so topic number 4 from the psychology course. Memory. So this is memory is a topic of psychology, is a subtopic of psychology, because memories are not a lot to do with neuroscience, of course, and it's a fascinating topic that I'm, to be honest with you, still getting my head around. Excuse the pun. But there's some very, very interesting articles and research out there that can help us with helping students to remember things in English. So remembering vocabulary, remembering chunks of language, and also understanding why people forget things. So, has anybody seen this film? Is anybody familiar with this film? What's the name of the film? The name of the film is it's called Inside Out. The English title, Inside Out. And the reason I've got a slide of it is that Inside Out, although it's been dramatized to make it more entertaining, a lot of the key information, a lot of the key concepts, I'd say, of what's going on inside the brain, because these 4 characters live inside the brain. They're the 5 characters. They're the 5 key emotions. And what's going on inside there is more or less based on good science. So there's a lot to do with memories and how we have a short-term memory, and then these get fed down into long-term memories. And these are the 5 emotions: anger, fear, joy. No, it's anger, fear. Yeah, anger, fear, joy. Oops, didn't mean to graffiti there. Disgust and sadness. So these are the 5 key emotions. So if you get a chance to watch that, it's actually a very good introduction to how memories work and how emotions interact as well. It's a very, very good film. So this is how things work. We get a sensory input, then this goes to our sensory memory, and then some of this will go into a short-term memory. And this can be enhanced by rehearsal, by repeating it back. And some short-term memory will go into long-term memory, and then long-term memory also feeds into our short-term memory. Okay, so these 2, short-term memory and long-term memory, sort of interact constantly. So if I ask you a question like, what was the color of the book that I talked about at the beginning of the webinar? Does anybody remember? Oh, we're going to have a big debate now about if this is orange. Okay, so a lot of you said orange. Yeah, very good. Orangey, yellow. Depends on your how your screen's set up, I suppose. But yeah, you remember that pretty well. So generally, working memory, short-term memory, lasts for 18 to 30 seconds. Okay, and then it gets forgotten. So most of the things that go through our eyes and ears and nose every single second, the vast majority will be forgotten within 30 seconds, less than 30 seconds. So the fact that you remember the color is pretty good. If I asked you to remember the authors, maybe it would be a little bit less successful, because you might have read them once, but then, you know, it wasn't important information at the time, you forgot it. Or if I asked you to remember, you know, a tiny detail, we can't store everything in our long-term memory. Which brings us to issue 1 when thinking about memory. Working memory and long-term memory, we can only process 10 new vocabulary items per lesson. So there's been lots of different studies, but it's always less than 10 that we can process at one time that can be then stored into the long-term memory. So there's no point giving students lists and lists of new vocabulary, pages and pages of new vocabulary, because, you know, neurologically it's not possible to process and store so much information at one time. It's overwhelming, and you're more likely to remember nothing if you overload someone with information, rather than just doing it 9 or 10 vocabulary items, then 9 or 10 the next class, 9 or 10 the next class, depending on how much they study in their own time, of course. Another important thing with memory is that the stronger the emotional attachment, the easier memory recall will be. So the more, there's a stray C there. If we create memories with emotional attachment, with emotions, then it's more likely to be stored into the long-term memory, and it's easier to recall, to get this out of the long-term memory and into the working memory, and then use this information. So if you remember a lesson from school, if you try and think back to a lesson that you had at school that you still remember the content of, we don't have time to discuss everyone's memories now, but it's most likely that it's something that had a strong emotional attachment, okay, because our memories embed more deeply into our brain when there's an emotional attachment, when something's enjoyable, something's fun. So in class, we should be trying to make things as memorable as possible by attaching emotions to them. So things like competitions, using the language, using target language, are vitally important, because they create an engagement and enjoyment that means that students are more likely to remember something. If you give a student a whole page of paper with vocabulary and say, okay, learn these, first, it's too many items, which we saw just now, and second, there's no emotion attached to it. So it's going to be easily forgotten in the long term, which is not what we want. Okay, another key thing is repetition. Okay, repetition doesn't just mean repeating the word chair, 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 like zombies. Repetition, so using the vocabulary and the grammar in different ways, but recycling it again and again and again. So the research says, if you can read that quote down there, in order to have a high probability of learning a word, you need to encounter it 15 to 20 times. That's from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. 15 or 20 times, okay? So don't be frustrated when a student can't remember a word after the first time that they saw it. Some people have certain conditions with photographic memory and things, where it only takes once, like in Suits. If anyone's seen Suits with Mike Ross, he just reads a document and he remembers every single word. But the vast majority of our learners will need it. The vocabulary items to be recycled again and again and again. So this means that we see things, we revise regularly during courses, and it also means that we set up routines, especially for younger learners, especially for teens. Setting up routines with language, with a language element, like when they come into the classroom, they have to say a certain thing. When they leave the classroom, they have to say a certain thing. Because these are repeated so many times, these are the things that students will remember first. Okay. And we need to be aware that memory is scattered information. What does that mean? So if you remember the picture of the neurons in the brain, it means that each memory actually is made of, if I explain this clearly, each memory is made of synaptic connections, so connections between these neurons. And then each memory, we need to sort of join these things together. So we take something from there, something from there, something from there, and then join them together to form one memory. Okay, so this is why we mix our memories together sometimes, and we think, oh, I think I went to the beach with my friend John, and also another memory where I went with my family, but maybe that was the same day. And then slowly you start to fuse these memories together because they're stored in all different places. So that, a memory is not a file in a box that we just take out and it's all there as it happened. This is, of course, this is an incredibly complex thing that I'm trying to explain, but basically they're stored in different places. A single memory is stored in different places, and then we have to pull it all together when we're retrieving it, and then we want to use it. So what does this mean? This means that we should try to learn in chunks, as we know, learn chunks of language in one go, because the memory is more likely to be stored in one place rather than having to put things back together again later on. And also learning in semantic chunks, so topics, vocabulary topics, all together as much as possible. All right, a couple of memory techniques to finish this section with. So the first one is the keyword technique. Now this is fascinating. This is used by memory world champions. So in memory world championships, you have to memorize a list of numbers. And I was listening to a podcast, and the world memory world champion uses this technique. So he pictures. Well, it's all about picturing, making an image with the words, or in his case, with the numbers. So he might, for example, in his head be walking down the street and he passes the number 11 jumping down the road. And then he walks into number 4, the house number 4, because it's his grandmother's house, and he sees number 2 and number 7 fighting in the kitchen, okay? And he goes on and on and on, and he makes this most fantastic story with images in his mind. And then he can remember everything from start to finish. So this is another example, not with numbers, but with an English word. The word transient. So you can't remember this word transient. You think, okay, it sounds like train sees ant. Train sees ant. So you have this picture in your mind of the train seeing the ant. And transient means short-lived. And of course, this is an excellent description of short-lived of transient, because the train is about to hit the ant. So it's most useful if the image and the meaning can go hand in hand. Okay, the image and the meaning go hand in hand. But as I said before, if you can take a semantic, a topic of words and create images using the spelling or using the phonetics of the word, and it's a very powerful way to remember. So this is from 1975. It's not from the future, it's from the past. So that's the first one, the keyword technique. And the second one, I can never pronounce that, mnemonic devices. So taking the first letters of the word, if the first letters of the word form a word which is pronounced as one, it's an acronym. In this case, it's just a mnemonic device. So we remembered, or I was taught anyway, at school, that the order of the planets from the sun is remembered by my very easy method, just speeds up naming planets. And you then go through very easily and think M for Mercury, V for Venus, E for Earth, M for Mars, J for Jupiter, etc. So what we're doing here is we're creating one memory, one storage, and in this one memory we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different words, and it's easier to recall because it's all in one place. Okay, so teaching students memory techniques can actually be hugely useful to them when they have so much to remember anyway, especially teens that have got so much going on, not just with English, you know, outside the English classroom, with the rest of their schoolwork, with everything else that goes on in their lives. So giving them these tips to help them with their memory, to help them recall things, can be very, very useful to them. So these are just a couple of ideas. There are more out there, but yeah, teaching these things explicitly, and especially showing them how memories are stored and why these techniques are useful, can be very, very useful for them and help them to remember more English, which is a lot of the struggle that we go through on a daily basis. I forgot the word. All right. So topic number 5. Do 2 more and then we'll have some time for questions. So I hope you have some questions in your head or written down, ready to go. So this is group dynamics. Now this is something that I hadn't really considered before I read the book that I mentioned at the beginning. I hadn't really considered it as an important factor, but it's a very, very important factor in a classroom of any more than one person, because how the group interacts and the atmosphere that's created in this team of people can be a huge motivating factor and be an excellent support network for people to make the most out of the learning experience. So if you think back to a team, it could be at work, it could be a sports team, it could be at school. If you think back to a team that worked really, really well together, and you remember the feelings you had towards the other people, the fact that it was easier to learn from other people and to help other people when they needed some help, your motivation to go back and take part in that team again and again is so much greater. And if you think maybe you've had a bad experience with a team and you're just not invested in the team, you don't have a common purpose, you don't have a goal, when you go there and spend time with them, you don't really make most of the time. And if we see a classroom like this, if we see the classroom fundamentally, the class as a group of people, if we can harness this energy that's created by forming a group, it will improve motivation in the group and also make our job much easier as teachers, because students will go there, they'll be ready to learn, they'll be open to new ideas, they'll be communicating a lot better. So group dynamics is vital. Positive group dynamics and attitudes change as a result. So a lot of what we're talking about with group dynamics relate to the three leadership styles from Lewin. So the first one's autocratic. You have to tell people what to do sometimes. There's no discussion. Laissez-faire is, here's your task, do what you want. Okay, these are the two extremes. And then in the middle, we have democratic, which is more like a negotiation. And the students have an input into the class. So there are moments for each of these at different times of the course. So group dynamics. This is what we'll be basing this section on, Tuckman's stages of group development. So Tuckman said that there are 4 stages for a group. A group comes together, forming. 50% of the time it's followed by a storming phase where there are disagreements, people aren't sure about their roles in the group. Only 50% of the time, according to his research. Then we get a norming phase, so we might go from forming to norming. It's possible to go straight across. Norming, where people are sort of getting more comfortable with each other, sharing ideas. And then performing is the optimal stage of group development, where people are open to ideas, they help each other out, and they can really take control of their own learning. So for each of these stages, Tuckman said that there's an optimal leadership style for this. Okay, so we're going to go through these quite rapidly. So in the forming stage, so when the group first comes together, it's best for the teacher to be more authoritarian. Okay, so of the 3 leadership styles, more authoritarian. So you need to give a sense of direction. We can all remember a time when we've walked into a new group and the leader of the group needs to set a direction, because nobody knows anybody else, nobody knows what their role is within the group. So you can't have a teacher that sits there at the front and says, okay guys, so what do you want to do today in the first lesson? Because nobody is going to dare to speak, I would say. So the teacher just needs to show that they're in control for the first few classes. So that means setting the activities, things like icebreakers, things like sharing information. So students share information and students agree on the rules of the class. But all of this must be instigated, must be organized from the teacher downwards. It's also a great time to set goals as a group. So setting goals as a group means that the individual is then accountable to the group. So if any of you have read Freakonomics, you'll remember that a social incentive is the most powerful reason to do something. It's more powerful than an economic incentive, and it's more powerful than, what was the other one? Social, economic, and I can't remember, but it's the most powerful incentive. So when you're accountable to the group, the day that you don't want to really come to class, you think, okay, well, actually, we've got these goals and I am part of this team, so I need to contribute and not let my classmates down. So you can set group goals, but also set individual goals. As we discussed before, very, very important for motivation, and try to set these mastery goals when we can. And then it's a great time to get to know your students. So this is a very simple activity where the students each go up to the board and they write 3 hobbies that they have. You can take a picture of the board and you can discuss these and use it as an icebreaker. But also throughout the course, it's a really good idea to try to incorporate students' hobbies into the work that you're doing. So if you're doing, I don't know, the present continuous, then why can't you do the present continuous in this case about what have we got? drawing or boxing, or include their hobbies in the work, or maybe you can find a text every now and again that cater for the interests of the group. Tasks have a social function, not just pedagogic one. All right, so storming, big problem. So the student starts to disagree. Some of you might be thinking, well, I've had classes that were storming for months or years. But people aren't sure of their roles in the group, and it's not a happy place to be. So the optimal leadership style is authoritarian towards democratic, okay? So you have to convince the students of the importance of the task, and the students have to be more aware of the value of their learning process. So again, don't engage in conflict. Like we saw with the teenage brain, engaging in conflict with an angry teenager will go downhill fast. Be careful to label the behavior, not the person, okay? Label the behavior, not the person. The behavior can be changed, but if you start telling a person, you are this, their personality, what they're born with, that can't be changed so easily. And then what we can sometimes do is to box a learner into a role. So you're the naughty student. I'm going to tell you you're the naughty student every class, and because of this, you're more likely to be the naughty student. Okay? I don't ask him because he never answers. Or if you never ask him, he will never answer. So I know it's difficult, but as much as possible, we need to reset. Because if we're talking about teenagers specifically, teenagers will change all the time. So we can't judge them by their previous behavior. We need to give them a chance to change, and we can do that by the attitudes that we have towards them. So during this stage, we can also give students group roles in the class. So today your job is to clean the board, today your job is to tidy the tables, etc., etc. And they can start teaching each other, okay? You start becoming responsible in the class, not just for your own learning, but for the group. Sorry, one second. So the third stage is norming. So this is when the group sort of, getting towards its better stages. And the optimal leadership style is democratic. Okay, so this is when you can start to use the students' input and to negotiate with them. How do you want to do this activity? Okay, I'll be honest with you. We have to look at the future perfect today, but we can do this, this, and this. Or have you got any other ideas? Okay, the important thing is that they're using the language. And it's not giving away your power as a teacher to let students decide on how they want to do it. It's actually showing that you're very much in control and that the group is responsible enough to take this on. And so it develops a sort of mutual respect between students and teacher. So this is by cooperative activities. Cooperative activities are things that can be done individually, but then put together into a piece of group work, like these posters that my students each made individually, get up and blah, 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 about one of their favorite hobbies, and then they were put together into a class display. And performing, this is the objective for every group. When everybody has a role in the group, everybody's motivated, hardworking, sharing, helping others, accepting help from others, and everybody's working at their optimal level to improve as fast as possible. So the optimal leadership style for the performing stage is delegating. So it's basically a democratic towards laissez-faire. So again, the more successful the group is, the more the teacher allows the students to make decisions and to have input into what kinds of things you're doing in class. And the more collaborative activities you can do. So collaborative activities can't be done by one person alone. It's all about using pooled resources. Like this one, we made the project-based task. and there was different stages to making this island, making its own rules, you know, making the flag. They did elections to this island, and this one was particularly funny because a lot of my students are Russian speaking, and they pronounced it Loch Island, and they told me why later on. They thought that was hilarious. Okay, and the final stage, which wasn't in Tuckman's original plan, was adjourning. Is adjourning. So this is how a class finishes. Do any of you still have lessons this term, or are you finished for the summer? If you still have a few lessons left this term, then this can be very, very useful for you. If you're finished for the summer, then you have to wait until next year. But please do remember this for the next time. You have a lesson today, later on today, Maria? Oh wow, okay, fantastic. So it's just in time for you. Okay, so the way that we finish a course is extremely important. A negative ending, as it says in the text, a negative ending could have detrimental effects on future L2 learning experiences. Okay, so even if a class has been a problem, we need to try and finish on a high. And this is because of the peak end rule. So how we remember a whole experience is often dictated by the way that it finishes. Okay, so we can remember a film that we enjoyed 2 hours of it, and the 2 hours of it and the last 5 minutes was terrible. We remember the whole film negatively. And this is the same for a language course as well. No matter what happened beforehand, the way that something finishes will dictate how we remember it. Okay, so that means that when we come back in September or October or whenever, we'll come back with a negative attitude or a positive attitude depending on how it finished. Okay, and obviously we want to start the next term or the next time we see the students with a positive attitude and a positive atmosphere in the class. So we need to finish the previous as positively as possible. And this is true also for lessons, individual lessons. Even if you've had a terrible lesson, smiling and saying, thank you, have a good evening, you know, hopefully it will make a difference the next time, but especially at the end of term when you have months before the next lesson. So you can do several things. You can have a little party, celebrate specific moments. You can have, you know, awards, certificates for specific things that the students have done. But yeah, have a good time. Have a good time, but you can use as much language as possible as well. And the last thing we're going to be talking about is body language. So, body language. So I'd like you to write in the text box in a moment. Elements of personal communication, there are 3 elements, main elements. Spoken words, voice and the tone of your voice, and body language. So the spoken words and tone can be very different. If I say, I saw that she stole my money. Or I say, I saw that she stole my money. Or if I say, I saw that she stole my money. I'm saying the same words, but the stress, the intonation of the whole sentence, the way that I'm saying them, the voice and the tone give meaning. And then of course the body language. If I saw that she stole my money, I'm scared. I saw that she stole my money. You know, I'm using my gestures. So body language makes a huge difference to the message that we're giving. So which one of these do you think accounts for 38% of communication? Spoken words, voice or tone, or body language? Body language, it's close. It's close. Body language actually accounts for 55% of personal communication. So more than half. I'm not sure how this is calculated by the researchers, but they've come to the conclusion that more than half of the message that we convey is done by our body language, which is fascinating, and shows how important it is when we're communicating with our students, which is our job, to communicate with them and to encourage them to communicate with us and with each other. So being aware of our body language is very, very important. So it really is true that first impressions are valuable. So we have about 5 minutes. This is a concept called thin slicing, okay? And you can decide on a person in the first 5 minutes of meeting them, and a lot of that is to do with their body language. And then the halo effect is, graffiti. The halo effect is the idea to do with body language again, that if we see someone with positive body language, we assume that they have other positive attributes to go with that. So we make assumptions subconsciously about their character. We make assumptions about their competency. So as a teacher, if your body language is very, very closed and negative, your students subconsciously will think that you probably don't know what you're talking about, you're not a person they can trust, and etc., etc. That's called the horn effect, so the negative side of that. On the other side, if students walk into the room for the first time and you smile at them and say hello, and use other positive body language cues, then they're more likely to be comfortable in the class, they're more likely to trust what you're saying, to believe that you are an effective professional, which I'm sure you all are, but we need students to believe it, and we need to believe it ourselves. So actually our body language also gives signals to our own brains about how confident we're feeling. It's not always vice versa. So you can actually trick your mind, just trick your emotions into feeling something by changing your body language. So doing things like power poses if you're short of confidence. So we haven't got much time left, but just to give you a few pointers on what is positive and negative body language. This can be so misleading. Sorry, I missed. What is the this? If you just write, what is the this? Yes, of course they can be, and it's not always a case of the more you smile the better, because if you're staring at somebody constantly and smiling, it's extremely creepy and has a very negative effect. So positive body language, and we'll leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So of course it's what you don't say that counts. So let's have a look through these. So closing your legs, we'll start from the bottom. Facing your feet away from someone. I wish I could show you more clearly, but because we just have this webinar screen, it's a bit difficult to set up and still speak to you at the same time. You know, pointing your feet away from someone as you're speaking to them is a very negative sign, and it shows subconsciously that you want to escape and you're getting ready to run away. Hands in the pockets is a big no-no. Crossing your arms, for many people subconsciously, we do it to protect our vital organs because we feel threatened, okay? So opening, get the camera down a little bit, opening our bodies up a little bit and using, can't see anything, showing the palms of our hands, show that we've got nothing in them, we're not a threat, and that we are communicating openly with the other person, with the students in our case. Okay, like we said before, smiling but not constantly, because that's incredibly creepy. Eye contact, sitting up, you know, or standing up straight instead of, you know, I don't want to be slouched like this. People are more likely to respond to us as teachers if we have positive body language. Things like eye contact, not constant, but intermittent eye contact. And yeah, this is a funny one. I don't think it's applicable. Don't wear sunglasses inside. I'm not sure anyone does. But there's many things that we can do with our body language. And also things that we can notice that students are doing with their body language. If they're working in pairs and small groups, we can see how comfortable they are. And you know, if they're not comfortable, to make judgments about who they're working with and maybe changing groups and things, depending on the cues that they give off with their body language. So it's about noticing our own body language, but also noticing others and helping. So body language, does it mean appearance or a perception of a person? So in this case, I'm focusing more on gestures and facial expressions and what we're doing with our body. Of course, you know, how we're dressed and things does have a role to play in how people perceive us, but it's yeah, it's not what we're looking at now, because every culture and every workplace will have its own sort of standards of dress code. And another thing to do with body language is communication is clearer when there's no objects between the two people communicating. So that means if you have a class and you're behind a table and you're behind a chair and the students are behind their chair, there's lots of objects, there's lots of barriers between you to clear communication. So if we can walk around, it depends on every single person's classroom is different. If we can walk around and even kneel down to a student's level and you know, get rid of as many objects as possible to communicate with them, then they're more likely to listen, and the communication is better. And even when students are communicating, if they can do mingle activities where they stand up and actually talk to each other with nothing between them, then they're communicating more clearly. Thank you, Maria, for all your participation. Thank you for coming. Okay, so reducing the amount of stuff between people is also a very good way to clear the communication lines. So using again, it's showing that we're not threatened by the other person because we're not defending ourselves, subconsciously defending ourselves with an object like a table. Okay, so I think we have a few minutes left. Are there any questions? Okay, guys, just write your questions in the text box, please. Several people are typing. I hope there are a few questions. So while you're thinking of questions, I'll leave the links to the blog posts that I talked about earlier down in the chat box. So that one is on the growth mindset lesson plan, and this one is for the SMART goal setting, and all of the PDFs are there that you can download and use in class. Thank you very much for your participation. Does anybody have any questions though? Anything that you'd like clarifying, or any comments even? They don't have to be questions. Would you recommend any other books on psychology and teaching? That's the main one that I've read. There was another article which was excellent. It's by, I'll type it in, Sue Bagshot. It's an article, it's a PDF that you can download, and it's called What English Teachers Need to Know About Teenage Brains. It's an excellent article, and it's very specific for English teachers, which is not always the case. That book that I mentioned is excellent because it's one of the few that I've read anyway that's specific for language learning. There's lots of literature on psychology and education in general, but of course our field of teaching a foreign language or a second language is very specific. There's a lot of things out there, and I hope the things that we talked about today do sort of stimulate further investigation. What other webinars are you going to present in the nearest future? I don't have any in my diary or on my calendar at the moment, but yeah, I hope to give more webinars in the future for sure. But at the moment, I don't have any booked. We can arrange some. Yes, I would always say I will always say yes to Trendy English if they ask. It's always a pleasure to be part of an event like this. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I think I will just say thank you very much to everyone for coming, and have a good evening and have a good summer. And if you have any questions, you have my email there. Please don't hesitate to contact me.
Okay, thank you, James. Thank you very much. It was really interesting, right? And I really did enjoy it. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, just to sum up. Again, I'd like to, by the way, can you hear me? Just some final words. Okay, so once again, one more time, thank you, James. It was really eye-opening talk and really thorough and deep. Well, and using psychology, it's an area which I suppose every teacher needs some background information about. So summing up today's talk, again, I'd like to thank our dedicated partners, and not only the companies, but in person. Studycraft Company and Елена Пересада, Moscow International Academy, Evgeny Usachев, Language Просвещение Company, and Oksana Nikulina, Anara Company, Vladimir Kalishevich, Title Publishing House, Alexei Konobeyev, Skyeng Company, Maria Avramenko, Fabula Company, the Dmitry Nikitin School and Dmitry Nikitin, Bilingual Child, Letterland Company, and Oksana Yeverbaum, Masha Tso and her group ВКонтакте Explorer Teacher, Olga Goncharova and the project I Love English, Svetlana Grebennikova and her group ВКонтакте English Mikano, Artyom Morozov and his group Mishki, Полина Кордик and her group ВКонтакте Продвинутый английский с Полиной Кордик, Екатерина Стукун and her group ВКонтакте English Teacher, Екатерина Stashevskaya and her group ВКонтакте Pro English, Natalia Поддубная and her group ВКонтакте Clumsy Bear, Irina Kalinina, Svetlana Ermots, Olga Kochenкова and Magellan Company, Petr Stepichev, and our golden partner Star Academy, Boris Samaryanov. And don't forget about the exclusive offer for teachers for summer camps and for TESOL programs they are offering. So all the participants of this summit have 3% discount for TESOL course teaching English for speakers of other languages leading to qualifications and employment before the 1st of September. Speaking about our next webinar, it will be this Saturday, and Alexei Konobeyev, editor-in-chief of Title Publishing House, will be talking about exam preparation and how to turn preparation into a fun communicative activity. So it is scheduled at 12 a.m. at noon this Saturday. So thank you very much for participation, and we all will be happy to see you soon in our Trendy English Summit. So see you on Saturday this week. Actually, we have only 2 webinars left, Saturday and Sunday. Have a nice evening and enjoy your teaching. Thank you very much.